Hey, folks, we're here at ng-conf. I'm talking to Victor Savkin. Victor, do you want to say hi?
Hey, everyone.
Now, I think some people know who you are, but why don't you give us just a brief introduction? Let us know who you are, what you do.
Sure. I used to be on the Angular team at Google, where I built a lot of key components of Angular. I used to blog a lot about Angular at vsavkin.com. And some time ago, 2 years ago, Jeff Cross from the Angular team and I left Google to start Narwhal. It's our company will help sort of large organizations be successful with Angular.
Right.
That's what I do most of the time today.
Yeah, it's funny. I talk to a whole bunch of people that I know, and I swear like every other time now it's, oh, well, I just went over to Narwhal.
Yeah, it's going really well. So last year we were at ng-conf, just two of us, Jeff and I. And now it's 10 of us. We hired a lot of really sort of smart folks from the community, and we keep hiring. So it's going really well. I'm really happy. Very stressed out. Every day, like exercises, mindfulness, meditation, running.
Right.
But other than that, it's going really well.
Great. Good to hear. So are you speaking?
Yeah, I'm speaking tomorrow, and I'm speaking about using Angular effectively at large organizations, which is sort of what I've been trying to figure out in the last year and a half.
Well, Google's a large organization. Is it different at Google than it is at other large organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question. So some of the things can be done in a similar way, right? I would say Google is huge, obviously, right? But Google is somewhat special in the sense that it may be a little bit ahead of most organizations. I mean, understandably, right? It's a very strong tech organization, right? The culture there is very, very strong, right? So some of the things we learn at Google, we try to apply at other companies, right? So it's sort of lessons learned from Google. But also not everything works that works at Google, right? Google has a particular culture, and different companies have different cultures, right? So you just cannot apply the same thing over and over again, right? So it changes from company to company.
Very cool. So what kind of advice do you give to people then?
Well, also we do a lot of hands-on work as well. It's not just advising. So we do sort of lots of things, right? But in terms of what kind of solutions we are trying to implement or help folks to implement, right? Some of it is inspired by Google. For example, we have a tool, an open source tool based on the Angular CLI code NX, which gives you like a monorepo light kind of setup, right? Which we learned from Google works really well, right? In case of Google, you have a giant monorepo for the whole work, right? It's like a lot of code, it's very, very sophisticated. For a lot of companies, you don't have to go that far, right? You can pick a few teams that are working together in a close way. And we can say, okay, let's say we have 200 developers. Let's try to do things in a slightly Google way, have a monorepo-like setup, right? We can contribute to the same repo, reuse code, whatever, right? That's one sort of point that we try to implement with a lot of folks, and I think it works really well. The other one is sort of the emphasis on tooling and automation, right? It's sort of, if you can automate it, right? There is no point of doing it like manually, by hand, in an ad hoc way. That's what we see a lot in many companies where some architect somewhere draws a diagram, writes a wiki page. It's completely out of sync, right? Half people in the company doesn't even know, that the wiki page is there. No one is reading it, So you don't want to have that because it's sort of this problem of figuring out how how your code works, how it's structured, we can solve using tools, right? We can run some code analysis, and basically generate the same wiki page, so to speak, right? Automatically, and it will always be up to date and correct and stuff like that, right? So things like that where it's not even exceptionally hard to do that. It's just for some reason, lots of companies don't spend enough effort on automating those kind of things, right? And then they struggle over and over again, and if you just help with that, right, you enable a lot of really good changes to the company.
Man, I just want to give you a hug because I've been preaching this for the last 3 months. Just, hey, look. You automate it, and then you just know it happens the way that it's supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly.
It's supposed to go. And I've worked for a number of companies where, it was, hey, well, we're going to deploy, right? And so we'd schedule the day for the deployment. And what they really meant was, we're going to stay after work. We're going to order in some pizzas. We're going to do the deployment at 7 or 8 at night. And hopefully we're done by 10. And so then I wind up calling my wife at 6:30 the next morning saying, we're still working on this thing. I'm so tired.
You can see sort of that. I mean, you can go really far with automation. But there is a lot of sort of long-hanging fruit, right? We sort of figured it out already, right? There is actually research. There is a book. I forgot the name of the author, but it's called Accelerate, which is about DevOps at large organizations, and how if you just focus on DevOps, right, suddenly your business performs a lot better, right? So it's not a new thing, right? We sort of already know it as an industry, right? It's just it takes time for some companies to sort of catch up, right, and start doing things the right way. And one more point I want to make is that some folks have this, I think, a false intuition that if you automate, you sort of remove the human interaction, or like you're becoming like a, this like element of this machine that works by itself or whatever. No, if you automate things like that, right, the sort of the boring stuff, right, you can actually interact more productively.
Yes.
Because you spend more time bike shedding, right, or whatever, doing all the things that you shouldn't be worrying about, right? You can talk about business and more creative stuff, right? So I think you actually enable more interaction. You enable more collaboration, right, by establishing a good baseline. We know that happens by itself. Now we can do creative work together, right?
Yep, that's exactly what I tell people too is, you essentially remove all of the stuff that takes up our cycles because it's necessary, and you allow us to just go shine and do what programmers really do best, which is solve problems creatively. You can't automate that.
Exactly.
And so if you get all the other stuff out of the way, then that's where you wind up.
Exactly. So like I think we're on the same page, right? So and once you sort of see it, once you see it in action, you can actually see that you are not a replaceable whatever, like some person that they can swap with another person, right? No. So like in opposite, right? Your contributions become stronger. Because it's easier to replace a person who's just going through the same set of steps, like pushing a release to some server, right? That actually can be replaced, right? That's why it can be automated, right? So you become less replaceable once you add more automation.
Yeah, and on another thing that I've also been on a kick on lately is hiring junior developers. A lot of that automation is simple enough, because you already know the process and you already have some of the stuff written. And there are usually also systems for a lot of the stuff. Speaking deployments, you can do it with Chef, or in Ruby there's Capistrano, and there are a million other things out there you can do it with. Junior developer can figure that stuff out. Figure out how your system works, and then as they get more familiar with it, then you can bring them up to contribute at the
I agree.
level as
to do more
else.
More creative work, right? I agree, 100%.
So there's just a lot going on, a lot of win there. I'm going to take a minute really quickly and just throw out a big thanks to Kendo UI. They sponsored the interviews for this conference, and so if people are out there looking for a clean way to build in visual elements to your applications, they're terrific. And we're kind of talking about automation and saving people the time and effort of doing things that they don't need to do. And some of these libraries like Kendo UI save you a lot of that effort too. Oh, I want a graph. It looks like this, and all I have to do is supply it the data.
No, I agree 100%. Again, it sort of boils down to the same idea that you want to see what is your strategic advantage. And chances are is not re-implementing like low-level UI components, right? Chances are, like if you're working, let's say, at a financial company, it's something to do with finance, right? That is that's what you need to focus on your efforts, right? Not rebuilding the low-level UI components over and over again. Someone else should do that, right? Basically, it's the same question you need to ask yourself over and over again. Can I buy it off the shelf, right? Like if it's, can I ask someone else to build it entirely, right? Or should I build it in-house, right? And the more important the piece of software for your organization is, the more strategic it is, the more you move from the scale. I mean that if it's an important piece of software for your organization that only you can build, and you want to compete with your, other companies in the same field, right? You build it in-house, right? Chances are, like the UI components, like it's very hard for you to do better than, let's say, Kendo does, right? Or like folks like Material, whatever, right? Those the set of tools that are already provided, that are excellent, right? So just use those. Don't try to rebuild them yourselves. Even though as engineers we have this like, I can do it better. Let me spend a few months time to no. You like, even if you can do it better, which I doubt, right? Because it's very hard to do it correctly, right? It's not what gives you a strategic advantage, right? It's not what will make you a lot of money, right?
Well, the other thing is, a lot of times we look at, the price of a license, and maybe it's, a couple $100 per developer. And we have 10 developers, so now we're talking about a couple $1,000s. It's still worth it because you look at, it's tested across how many apps.
Exactly.
And are you going to be able to write those components that well in the couple weeks that you're going to pay a developer that money in salary and benefits for?
Exactly.
And so you're saving yourself not just the effort and the worry over these low-level things, but you're saving yourself a ton of money.
No, I agree. It all boils down to how can you effectively spend the money or the resources you have, right?
Yep.
Which is like mostly money, right?
Yep.
Chances are it's not building UI components, right?
Yep.
Unless you're the company that sells UI components, right? And that's what your strength is, right? Most companies I work with, right, they don't build UI components, right? They automate like financial stuff, some logistics stuff and stuff like that, right? So that's what they should focus on, right? When they pay the engineers.
Yep, that makes a ton of sense. So one other thing that I'm hoping to do with these interviews is help people get to know the speakers on sort of a personal level a little bit. So, you mentioned when you walked in, Stephen Fluen was here, and so you guys were chatting. You mentioned you're getting married soon.
Right.
But what's life like for Victor Savkin? What do you do when you're not working?
When I'm not working, a lot of things. As most folks, I live in Toronto, so it's and I live downtown Toronto, so I like the big city life, right? I like nightlife. So my partner and I, she and I, we go, to restaurants, to shows, to theater, those kind of things. I read a lot. I read a lot of fiction, and I think that that's one of the things that seems very boring, right? But once you get into good fiction, it's an enjoyable activity. I read a lot of philosophy. That's my main hobby, probably. Carefully reading philosophy. I'm not particularly unique in this way, right?
Right.
I would say it's like a big city life. I go around, watch shows, stuff like that. Listen to music in cafes and stuff like that.
So why don't you give us a couple of fiction recommendations then?
Okay, cool. I can give you a few. To my embarrassment, so I'm Russian. So I grew up in Russia and I moved to Canada 9 years ago.
Right.
And for some weird reason, in Russia, no one reads John Steinbeck. I don't know what it is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not a thing, right? Here, it's it's mandatory, right? You read a book.
Cool. You have to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no one knows about him. It's not a thing, right? So I discovered him. For some reason, I decided to read him a few months ago, and boy, he is good. So I read a bunch of his stuff, and I would recommend The East of Eden, which is his magnum opus, the biggest volume by far. I don't think it's read in schools because it's just so huge, right? And it's great because it's sort of about human nature, and you can see a lot of biblical references in there. So it's a very nuanced book, right? Really exceptionally well written. So I like that a lot.
Is that the one where they're in the Dust Bowl and they move out west?
Yeah, so they essentially... you might be referring to the other one. In this case, there are two brothers who live together. So there is a biblical reference in there. So they live on the east coast or whatever, and then one of them is moving west, right?
Oh, okay.
You can sort of see the three generations of this family.
It's a different book.
Yeah, it's a different book, yeah. But it's very good. So I recommend folks to check, even though it's very long, right? It's painfully long, but I enjoyed it. Another one that I enjoyed a lot was... again, it's a really well-known book. For some reason, as a teenager, I didn't have a chance to read it, or whatever. It's called Zen and Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it's obviously not about motorcycle maintenance, right? And especially if you're into philosophy, there are a lot of philosophical elements in the book. It's basically about sort of a very reflective book around the 60s, about the condition we're living in, and about two ways to look at the world, sort of more analytical way and more intuitive way, sort of less analytical way, how they conflict, And it's written in a very interesting style. So I enjoyed the book a lot. I tried to read other books by the same author, and they weren't nearly as good.
Right.
So that book is excellent. So I think you should check it out.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that one, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, I think it's enjoyable to read because of how insightful the author is. So you can look at some observation, like, I'm drinking coffee, and interesting. That seems like a boring activity, but there is a lot of insight about how you can think about drinking coffee, stuff like that.
Interesting, very interesting. So how do people know if they need your particular brand of help at Narwhal?
Right. So I think we work with different companies and different scales and stuff like that, but the sweet spot is sort of larger companies. We have multiple teams that are sort of...
How large is larger?
Again, it varies. I don't want to discourage small companies, say you'll never qualify or whatever, right?
Right.
But a lot of our companies sort of the 400 to 500 kind of companies. So they're very large. They can have they have hundreds or thousands of Angular engineers, right? So they're very big. And if you have a bunch of teams who are say starting on Angular work, or you're already sort of halfway there, right? You've been working for a year or two,
right?
Maybe you're moving AngularJS stuff into Angular 5 or whatnot, right? And you feel like it's not exactly like you're losing velocity, right? Something is not going as well as it should, right? Which is often the case, right? And it's no one's fault. It's very hard, right? To change your habits, you know, to like again switch to more automating things and stuff like that, right? We usually help. We have a bunch of folks on our side, right, who augment the teams on that side. So we work with teams. We never do like turnkey solution stuff, right? We work with folks on that side full time, right? Helping them implement maybe the more interesting pieces, you know, and showing them at the same time how it's implemented, you know, so they can learn, right? Helping them to automate some use cases, you know, again, and showing them why they automate in this particular way, right? So folks can sort of take it from there, right, and move forward. So our goal is not to build a piece of software for you, because there are companies that do that really well, right? But rather make your teams sort of be successful at working with Angular, right? And doing it maybe in a more sort of googly way, right? I don't want to say it's like exactly like Google, because it's not, right? But sort of some of the practices we recommend and try to implement are inspired, right, by our experience at Google, right? And I think it creates a lot of really positive impact, right? If the companies are buying into that and they're trying to make a change, right? You can see that the automation goes up, you know, the code becomes higher quality, you know, the velocity, you know, goes up, right? So, so that's probably the sweet spot, right? But you don't have to be a giant corporation, right? We have clients who are smaller, right? And if the project is interesting, right, we're happy to work with those clients as well.
Cool. Now, if people want to see what you're thinking about or doing these days, I'm assuming Twitter or a blog or things like that, where do they go find your stuff?
Right. So Twitter, victorsavkin.com, Victor Savkin, at Victor Savkin, it's my Twitter handle. I try to tweet, so you can follow me because I try to not spam people. I'm very careful with like tweeting just enough not to irritate people, because I know how I get irritated when I'm like, okay, I see 50 tweets from one person in a row, right? Like it's too much, right? So it's mostly Angular related stuff, right? Sometimes I tweet something about my fancy keyboard or whatever, but it's mostly like professional stuff. And I also blog at, I used to blog at visavkin.com, but these days I blog at blog.naro.io. So you can just read that blog. I think it has a lot of high quality Angular content as well.
Good deal. Well, thanks for coming and talking to us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
If I get this up before your talk, you said it's tomorrow afternoon?
Yeah, I think it's tomorrow 11:30.
Tomorrow at 11:30. That would be Friday at 11:30. So if you're watching this and it's not yet Friday at 11:30, go check it out.
Oh, cool.
Because it should be on the live stream, right?
Yep.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Victor.